She believed in systematic change. But sometimes, the path to that change required bold, individual stance. As she headed to her apartment after the confrontation with Officers Carter and Lowe, Ava's mind churned. The memory of their sneering faces, the humiliation of being searched on the sidewalk for no legitimate reason, refused to fade. The old rage of feeling powerless flashed to life. But this time, she was not a helpless child. She had the means and the authority to fight back. Once home, she sat at her kitchen table, the smell of fresh coffee still clinging to the air. The summons lay next to her laptop like a badge of injustice. She wanted to shred it in frustration, but she knew better. This was more than just a ticket. It was evidence. She opened her laptop and typed a quick memo summarizing what had happened. She included the time, location, and details of the officer's conduct. She described the racist undertones, their bullying tactics, and their threat to add bogus charges for resisting. Her notes were precise. Every detail mattered in a potential investigation. Then she made a call. Marcus Reed, a fellow attorney who worked in a different branch of the Justice Department, picked up almost immediately. Marcus had been her classmate at Columbia Law, a brilliant litigator with a passion for rooting out police misconduct. Ava. His voice held a note of concern. What's going on? Ava didn't give him all the details over the phone, just enough so he understood this was something serious, something that might require federal oversight. Marcus agreed to help in any way he could. Throughout the evening, Ava's emotions whirled between simmering anger and resolute determination. She thought of her parents, who had always stood up for what was right. She thought of Sharon Fields, who taught her the power of empathy and strategy. She thought of all the people who had been in her situation, lacking the resources or the knowledge to fight back. She refused to let this incident be swept under the rug. Tomorrow, she whispered aloud, locking her notes in her home safe. Tomorrow, I take the first step. Morning sunlight filtered through Ava's window, gilding her living room in a soft glow. She woke feeling more determined than ever, but also with a gnawing unease about what might happen next. She was used to legal battles playing out behind stacks of briefs and motions, not on the side of a city street in front of random onlookers. Nevertheless, she was prepared to confront the situation. After showering and dressing in a crisp navy suit, Ava meticulously organized her documents. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. He confirmed their lunchtime meeting at a nearby cafe. Ava exhaled, grateful to have support from a friend who understood the intricacies of federal law and the complexities of racial profiling cases. She headed out, locking her apartment door behind her. This time, she took the L train, partly to avoid any additional run-ins with local law enforcement. Arriving at the Department of Justice, Ava passed through security with her usual professional smile, though inside, she was bracing herself. She carried the summons in a neat envelope, tucked securely under her arm. Her morning was consumed by meetings and phone calls, until finally, noon arrived. She slipped out to the bustling cafe, where Marcus waited. He rose to greet her, looking concerned. Marcus was a tall man with a warm smile, though that warmth was subdued now as he looked at Ava. They ordered coffee and sandwiches, then sat by a window overlooking the street, where midday traffic rumbled by. She recounted the entire story: the supposed speeding violation, the forced car search, the humiliating pat-down, the officer's racist undertones. Marcus listened intently, eyebrows furrowed. By the time she finished, he seemed as incensed as she was. These guys have no idea who they're dealing with, he said softly but firmly. But it's bigger than that. This is exactly what we talk about all the time: abuse of power under the guise of law enforcement. Ava nodded. I'm worried they'll file a false report or escalate. They mentioned resisting arrest. If they put that on the record, it could tarnish my reputation, even if I can clear my name. I don't want to think about how it could harm other people they stop. Exactly, Marcus agreed. We need to be strategic. Are you thinking of reporting this to Internal Affairs or going straight to the Civil Rights Division? I'm thinking both, Ava said, tapping her pen on the table. And if they actually file charges against me? She exhaled. I'll reveal my credentials in court, if necessary. And when that moment came, she would not hold back. Marcus hesitated. That'll be a bombshell. But, Ava, be careful. Some judges hate surprises in their courtroom. Then again, if the judge is in on it. He glanced at her meaningfully. You said these guys are known for intimidation. Maybe they have connections. Ava's jaw tightened. I'll handle it. Right now, I'm going to gather more evidence. I'm sure there were bystanders who recorded some of it on their phones. I'm going to see if I can track down any witness statements. After lunch, Ava returned to her office. She spent part of the afternoon searching social media, scanning hashtags and local neighborhood pages to see if any videos had been posted of her encounter. She discovered one short clip on Twitter. It showed Officer Lowe pushing her against the side of her car while Officer Carter rummaged through the back seat. The video wasn't long, but it clearly showed that Ava was calm and cooperative, no sign of resistance. Ava downloaded the clip immediately, carefully documenting its source. Just as she finished labeling the video file, her cell phone rang. Unknown number. She debated not answering, but a gut feeling made her pick up. Hello. Silence crackled for a moment. Then, a gruff voice spoke. Miss Ava Mitchell? Her pulse quickened. Yes, this is she. This is Detective Brian Costello, Chicago PD Internal Affairs. I received a message from Marcus Reed about an incident involving two officers, Brent Carter and David Lowe. I'd like to meet with you. Ava's heart lifted slightly. She hadn't expected an internal affairs detective to contact her so quickly, but it was a promising sign. Of course, detective, she said. When's good for you? The detective suggested the following morning at a small conference room in police headquarters. Ava agreed. She ended the call with a glimmer of hope. Someone within the system was willing to investigate. Yet, that evening, as Ava was preparing dinner in her tiny kitchen, she got another unexpected call. This time, from a Chicago PD desk officer. Miss Mitchell, the voice on the other end stated flatly. There's now a warrant for your arrest on charges of resisting arrest and obstruction. You're required to report to the precinct or face additional penalties. The news hit her like a punch to the gut. She nearly dropped her phone. They had actually done it. Twisted the story to paint her as the aggressor. She cursed under her breath, panic warring with fury. Then she remembered who she was. Ava inhaled deeply, holding on to her composure. This was beyond mere intimidation. This was a calculated move, to scare her, to tarnish her record before she could push forward with her complaint. If she was arrested, even for a moment, a mugshot and public record could follow her for years. For a moment, Ava felt a wave of despair. Then, she steadied herself. She was not alone, and she had the truth. Grabbing her keys, her documents, and a charged phone, she marched out the door, ready to confront the precinct, armed with the only weapon that truly mattered, her legal knowledge. Late evening had fallen by the time Ava arrived at the 2nd District Precinct in Chicago. The building's cold brick exterior loomed under flickering streetlights. She parked her car and took a moment to compose herself, going through mental checklists of the law. Her breath came quickly, betraying the nerves she tried to mask under her professional exterior. When Ava stepped into the station, the stale smell of sweat and old coffee assaulted her senses. Officers milled about, some handling paperwork, others chatting idly. The moment she approached the counter, heads turned. She told the desk sergeant she was there regarding a warrant. The sergeant, a graying man with tired eyes, seemed perplexed at first, perhaps not expecting the subject of a warrant to calmly walk in. He instructed her to wait. Ava settled into a plastic chair under flickering fluorescent lights, ignoring the suspicious glares from some officers. After an agonizing half-hour, a young officer led her to a small interrogation room. Its cinder block walls were painted in off-white, and a single overhead light buzzed faintly. She set her documents on the table, her heart thudding. Shortly after, Detective Brian Costello entered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard. Ava recognized his voice from the phone call. He gave her a nod that was somewhere between professional courtesy and sympathy. Miss Mitchell, thank you for coming in, he said. I understand there's a warrant out for your arrest, but I also spoke with Marcus Reed, who said you have information that might clear this up. Ava handed him the summons for speeding, the short Twitter video clip on a USB drive, the notes she'd taken about the encounter. Costello scanned them briefly, frowning. The detective scratched his chin and leaned forward. This is serious, he admitted. Officers Carter and Lowe filed a report claiming you resisted, tried to flee, and verbally threatened them. That's a lie, Ava said, working to keep her voice steady. She tapped the USB. From the moment Ava Mitchell stepped inside the courthouse, the heat of unspoken judgment swirled around her like a dense fog. She had grown accustomed to subtle slights and sidelong glances, But nothing prepared her for the open hostility she felt that day. Whispers rippled across the gallery benches, fueled by rumors and prejudice. At the plaintiff's table, two uniformed officers smirked with grim confidence. A stern judge, rumored to side with law enforcement whenever possible, cleared his throat as he prepared to address the court. But no one expected the truth lurking beneath Ava's calm demeanor. She was ready. She had a devastating secret weapon that would rock the entire room. Ava Mitchell's day began like any other. She woke before sunrise in her modest apartment in Chicago's South Loop, right near the bustling intersection of Michigan Avenue and Roosevelt Road. The gentle hum of early morning traffic lulled her into her routine. Coffee, a brisk walk to clear her mind, then a train ride into the city's legal district. As she dressed in a pressed blouse and navy slacks, she mentally reviewed her schedule. She had a long list of errands for the Department of Justice that day, a docket filled with motions to file and briefs to read. Despite the mountain of responsibilities, she felt a quiet thrill. She loved her job and the privilege it gave her to help others, especially those often overlooked by the system. She never anticipated that her day would take a sharp turn when she decided to drive instead of taking the L train. A call had come in about a legal matter in the neighboring Englewood district, and Ava wanted the flexibility of her car. She navigated the morning rush hour traffic, weaving cautiously past impatient commuters. Soft jazz played on the radio, her stress relieved by a gentle melody. She felt at peace until a siren screamed behind her. Glancing in her rearview mirror, she spotted a police cruiser tailing her. The lights flashed red and blue, dancing ominously against the windows of the buildings around them. Ava's pulse quickened. Though she had done nothing wrong, she signaled and pulled over, heart thumping. She reminded herself to stay calm. She knew the standard protocol: keep your hands visible, wait for the officer to approach, comply with instructions. Still, her mind swirled with memories of countless news stories about black motorists being harassed or harmed during routine stops. Moments later, two officers stepped out. One was tall and lanky, with pale skin and a mustache that hung limply above thin lips. Officer Brent Carter. The second officer, David Lowe, was heavier set, his face red from either the wind or irritation. They both approached Ava's window with a swagger that signaled authority. Ava lowered her window, greeted them politely, and asked how she could help. Officer Carter demanded her license, registration, and proof of insurance. His tone was clipped, bordering on hostile. Ava complied without hesitation, handing over her documents. She asked why she was being stopped, but her question was met with a dismissive wave of Carter's hand. Officer Lowe smirked, leaning closer to peer inside her car. Ava tightened her grip on the steering wheel, that sense of caution building in her chest. "You were speeding back there," Carter finally answered. "Doing 45 and a 30. Ava knew she had not been speeding. She had been on the lookout for pedestrians and bicyclists in the busy neighborhood, carefully staying at or below the speed limit. But she also knew that any sign of argument could escalate the situation. She took a calm breath, her mind toggling between her knowledge of the law and her awareness of how these encounters often went. "Officer," she replied steadily, "I believe I was under the limit. Is there any possibility you might have clocked the wrong car?" Lowe rolled his eyes. "I don't make mistakes with my radar gun." "Listen, lady, are you going to give us trouble?" Ava reined in her frustration. She was no stranger to microaggressions, but something about the officer's demeanor suggested more than just a casual insult. She had to pick her words carefully. "I'm not trying to give you any trouble. I'm just asking for clarity." Carter's thin lips curled into a sneer. He took a step back, consulting with Lowe in hushed tones, though Ava caught snatches of their whispered conversation, something about attitude, and these people. Her eyes narrowed. She'd heard enough coded language in her life to know what was going on inside. A spark of anger ignited. Carter returned. "Step out of the car," he ordered. "We need to do a quick search." "Search? For what reason?" Ava asked, her heart pounding. She knew that to request a search, they needed probable cause or her consent, which she had every right to refuse. Lowe huffed, leaning forward again. "Are you resisting, ma'am?" Ava shook her head, working hard to maintain a composed tone. "I'm just asserting my right to ask why I'm being searched. That's all." The tension escalated quickly. Carter yanked on the door handle. "Get out of the car. Now." Ava exhaled sharply and opened the door, stepping out slowly, hands visible. People on the sidewalk began to slow, curious about the scene unfolding. Ava noticed the sideways glances, the subtle shock or discomfort on bystanders' faces. Somewhere, a phone camera was raised, capturing the moment. She set her jaw in determination. If they wanted to play this game, she would comply, but only to a point. As Ava stood beside her car, Officer Lowe patted her down brusquely while Carter rummaged through the back seat. Ava had never felt so violated. Each time she tried to speak, Lowe snapped at her to stay quiet. She complied, though her anger roiled just beneath the surface. She wasn't just any passerby. She was a United States attorney in the making, someone who had worked tirelessly to uphold justice. She was intimately familiar with the law and the boundaries these officers were crossing. Eventually, Carter slammed the back door. "There's nothing here. Let's just write her up for speeding," Lowe muttered, "and maybe resisting an officer." "Resisting?" Ava repeated, alarmed. "I cooperated fully." Lowe smirked again. "We'll see what the report says." The officers didn't realize they had just picked a fight with someone who possessed extensive legal expertise. Someone who, in a single phone call, could set a serious investigation into motion. But Ava held her cards close. She would not reveal her position yet. She wanted to see how far they would take this charade. With her heart pounding, Ava promised herself she would fight back. This injustice would not go unanswered. As Ava watched the officers drive away, leaving her with a summons for speeding and a threat of additional charges, she felt herself trembling, not with fear, but with a blazing fury. The calm facade she displayed during the encounter had been her shield, honed over years of enduring casual racism, dismissive stares, and sneering comments that chipped away at her sense of belonging. A shield she had carefully constructed out of pride, dignity, and, most of all, resolve. Long before she had the power to prosecute cases, Ava Mitchell had been a young girl growing up in the heart of Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor Mitchell, had instilled in her a profound sense of justice from an early age. Her father was a history professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago, specializing in African American studies. Her mother was a social worker who advocated for low-income families. Dinner table conversations revolved around civil rights heroes, systemic oppression, and ways to fight for those who lacked the means to stand up for themselves. She learned from stories of ancestors who marched in Selma or staged sit-ins, the unbreakable spirit of resistance. But she also learned that real change required a blend of passion and strategic thinking. When Ava was just 9 years old, she witnessed a tense argument between her uncle and a police officer who had roughed him up without cause. Ava remembered feeling small and powerless, tears burning her eyes. That image of a grown man forced to stand there while he was unjustly berated never left her mind. It inspired her to pursue law, to become someone who could challenge the abuse of power at its highest levels. In high school, Ava excelled in debate club, quickly becoming known for her sharp intellect and cool composure under pressure. She also volunteered at a local community legal aid office, where she saw firsthand how the law could be both a sword and a shield. A kindly lawyer named Sharon Fields mentored Ava, teaching her the basics of legal research and the importance of compassion. "Empathy, Ava," Sharon would say. "Without it, you become just another cog in a broken system." At Northwestern University, Ava double-majored in political science and African American studies. She'd often find herself in heated seminars about systemic racism, where her personal experiences and academic research melded into a deep conviction: the justice system needed to be reformed from within. She graduated with high honors, moved on to Columbia Law School, and later landed a coveted clerkship at the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. Her supervisors recognized her unwavering commitment to civil rights. When Ava moved on to a position with the Department of Justice in Chicago's Northern District, it felt like destiny. All those years, Ava cultivated a keen understanding of the law's complexities and its potential to be wielded for good. She carried with her the stories of her family, her mentors, and the countless victims of injustice. She made a personal vow: if she ever encountered a situation of blatant racial discrimination, she would address it head-on. That clip shows part of the stop. "I didn't resist. If anything, they were the aggressors." Costello exhaled. "I'm not the judge here, but I can see there's more to this than meets the eye. For formality's sake, we have to process you, but I'll do it discreetly. Then, we can start an investigation. I'll ask the district attorney's office to hold off on pressing charges until we've reviewed everything." Ava's heart sank at the idea of being processed. She nodded, though, understanding the protocol. "All right," she managed. He escorted her through a series of hallways. Ava's cheeks burned with humiliation as she was fingerprinted and briefly photographed. Though Costello ensured she was not handcuffed, the entire ordeal felt surreal. Here she was, an assistant U.S. attorney with an unblemished record, being treated like a criminal. She forced herself to breathe, reminding herself this was temporary, and justice could still prevail. After what felt like an eternity, Costello returned her belongings. He guided her to a quieter office space away from curious eyes. There, Ava recounted her story again, in detail, from the moment she saw the flashing lights, to the officer's sneering remarks, and the baseless search of her vehicle. Costello took copious notes. "I'll need to interview them separately," he said. "But let's be clear. If they claimed you resisted, and you have video evidence to the contrary, this could be a serious case of falsified reports." Ava's voice was steady despite the knot in her stomach. "This is likely a pattern. If they did it to me, they could be doing it to countless others, who don't have the resources or knowledge to fight back." Costello paused, then nodded. "I understand. I'll do my part. But keep in mind, this precinct tends to close ranks. Not everyone's going to be happy I'm looking into it." Ava thanked him for his honesty. By the time she left the station, her emotions teetered between relief and outrage. She returned home in the early hours, exhausted. Her mind churned with potential next steps. She needed to inform her superiors at the Department of Justice. An actual arrest record, no matter how unfounded, would raise questions. But if there was ever a test of the system she believed in, this was it. Sleep didn't come easily. Ava lay awake, replaying the precinct scene over and over, the cold demands for her fingerprints, the flash of the camera capturing her mugshot. She felt an unfamiliar vulnerability, tempered only by her unwavering resolve. One thought circled in her mind. Let them see me in court. Let them see who I really am. And when that moment came, she would not hold back. The summons and the warrant demanded that Ava appear in criminal court just 1 week later. In that short span, Ava made a calculated decision. She hired a private defense lawyer. An ironic twist, given her own role as a federal prosecutor. She chose Stella Morano, a seasoned attorney known for her expertise in wrongful arrests and civil rights cases. Stella had taken on corrupt officers before and won. On the morning of the hearing, Ava dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray skirt suit. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair, a soft twist pinned at the nape of her neck, reflecting the controlled fury simmering inside her. She refused to walk into that courtroom looking disheveled or intimidated. She was determined to hold her head high. Stella picked her up, and together, they traveled to the Cook County Criminal Court in downtown Chicago. The building's cavernous interior buzzed with the daily chaos of arraignments and hearings. Lawyers scurrying with thick case files, defendants in cheap suits pacing nervously, and stoic officers watching from the corners. The air reeked of stale coffee and tension. As Ava and Stella entered the courtroom, Ava's pulse accelerated. She recognized the presiding judge from local headlines, Judge Daniel Harrison. He was rumored to be tough on defendants and notoriously deferential to law enforcement. He rarely questioned police testimony, even when there were inconsistencies. Rumor had it that complaints of racial bias often fell on deaf ears in his court. Before their case was called, Ava glanced at the front row of benches. There they were, Officers Carter and Lowe, their uniforms crisp, expressions smug. Their attorney, a stern-faced prosecutor named Caroline Whitaker, leaned in to whisper something to them, prompting a quiet chuckle from Lowe. Ava swallowed her anger. Her heart thumped as she reminded herself of her father's words. Never lose your cool in the face of injustice. That's when they have power over you. Finally, the court clerk announced Ava's case. Stella walked forward, Ava by her side. A hush fell over the room. Judge Harrison flipped through the file, his expression impassive. Caroline Whitaker stood first, outlining the charges: resisting arrest, obstruction of governmental administration, and disorderly conduct. She claimed that Ava had become belligerent during a lawful traffic stop, refused to comply with officers' instructions, and even attempted to flee. At that last statement, Ava nearly snorted in disbelief. Stella placed a steady hand on her arm, cautioning her to remain composed. Once Whitaker finished, Stella cleared her throat and stepped forward. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but resonant. "My client categorically denies these charges. We have video evidence, brief but crucial, that contradicts the officer's account. Miss Mitchell not only cooperated fully, but was subjected to an improper search and humiliating treatment." Judge Harrison peered over his reading glasses. "Video evidence? From a body cam?" It's from a bystander, Stella replied. Shot on a cell phone and posted online. We have the original file as well. Whitaker immediately interjected. Your Honor, I'd caution reliance on shaky cell phone videos. There's no guarantee of authenticity. My officers have clean records, and the official police report states the defendant resisted. We have no reason to doubt their testimony. Judge Harrison frowned slightly. I'll allow the video, but it must be verified. For now, we'll proceed with the arraignment. He turned to Ava. Miss Mitchell, how do you plead? Before Ava could answer, Stella spoke firmly. Not guilty, Your Honor. Harrison made a note. Very well. Let's schedule a preliminary hearing to review the evidence. He glanced up at Ava for the first time. His gaze lingered. Ava felt an unsettling chill, as though he was assessing more than just her posture. Then he spoke curtly. Bail is set at $55,000. Next matter. Ava's cheeks flamed with indignation. Bail, for such a charge? Stella had anticipated this and posted it immediately. As Ava turned to leave, her eyes locked with Officer Carter. He smirked. His lips mouthed something she couldn't fully discern, but she recognized the contempt. Ava forced herself to turn away. Out in the hallway, Stella led her to a bench. This is going to be an uphill battle with Harrison on the bench, Stella sighed. And that DA, Whitaker? She's got a reputation for defending the police at all costs. Ava stared at the corridor's drab walls, mind racing. I'm not backing down. I need to speak with the Civil Rights Division. This could become a federal matter. Stella nodded. I agree. The moment you reveal your position with the DOJ, it'll change the game. But do you want to tip your hand so soon? Ava paused, considering. Not yet, she said finally. I need more evidence. More insight into these officers' track records. And if Harrison tries to railroad this case. Her expression hardened. We'll see about moving it to federal court. Stella agreed, and they parted ways after scheduling a strategy meeting. Ava walked out of the courthouse with an uneasy mix of anger and steely resolve. The subtle slights, the humiliating pat-down, the malicious charges. None of it would deter her. She pulled out her phone and called Marcus, told him the next steps. She also planned to talk to a contact at the Civil Rights Division, laying the groundwork for a potential investigation into these officers. As she stepped onto the bustling street, Ava felt the wind on her face, a reminder of her freedom and her will. She thought about how many others, less equipped than she, might have been crushed by this system. A silent promise echoed in her mind. She would not be broken. She would fight this injustice head-on. And when the time was right, she would let them know exactly who they were dealing with. Ava dove headfirst into gathering more evidence. She and Stella constructed a meticulous defense strategy, guided by Ava's insider knowledge of how prosecutors operate. Late into the night, she pored over case law, studied previous complaints against officers Carter and Lowe, and analyzed the local precinct's record of misconduct allegations. Marcus connected Ava with Samira Green, a staff attorney at the Illinois Civil Liberties Union, specializing in police accountability. Over a cup of coffee at a local diner, Ava shared the details of her case. Samira, in turn, provided a trove of insights into Carter and Lowe's histories. They had been named in at least 3 prior complaints for excessive force. Yet, none resulted in formal discipline. The complaints had all been dismissed for lack of evidence. Samira sighed, pushing the files toward Ava. The pattern is there. We just need to prove it conclusively. Ava's heart pounded as she flipped through the documents. Statements from individuals who claimed they had been harassed or manhandled. Reports detailing unlawful searches, intimidation, racial slurs. The language of the complainants varied, but the core allegations were disturbingly similar. These officers targeted people of color during traffic stops and escalated the encounters without clear justification. Ava's jaw clenched. Why weren't any of these complaints sustained? She asked softly, though she already suspected the answer. Samira rolled her eyes. You know how it goes. Witnesses disappear. Internal Affairs finds technical reasons to dismiss the cases. And judges? They always seem to give officers the benefit of the doubt. Ava set the files down, exhaling slowly. Maybe this time will be different. Samira smiled, a hint of optimism in her otherwise weary expression. It might be. You have the credentials. You know how to navigate the system. But Ava, be cautious, because the pushback could get ugly. Ava nodded in understanding. Armed with these files, Ava returned to her office at the Department of Justice. She walked a fine line. She hadn't officially disclosed her predicament to her direct supervisors, worried they might remove her from active cases. Or worse, question her ability to remain unbiased. Still, she confided in one trusted colleague, Jennifer Robles, a fellow federal prosecutor and close friend. Jennifer listened, her face darkening with outrage as Ava laid out the events. "This is insane," Jennifer said, pacing the office. "These officers clearly picked the wrong person to harass. But Ava, you have to protect yourself. The second they find out you're a federal attorney, it could escalate." Ava sighed. "I know, but if I reveal it at the right time, it might scare them into dropping the case, or even open them up to federal charges." Jennifer folded her arms. "And if the judge is already biased against you? Then we file a motion to recuse him," Ava said, her voice firm. "And if that fails, the Civil Rights Division might launch a full-blown investigation." Jennifer nodded approvingly. "Good. Just be ready, because once the DOJ gets involved, this won't just be about you. This could blow open an entire precinct's misconduct history." Ava felt a flicker of hope. If she could gather enough compelling evidence, the DOJ might step in. She had no illusions. It could take months, even years to see real accountability. But she was prepared for the long haul. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived. Ava, Stella, and Marcus walked into the courthouse, armed with sworn statements from bystanders, the Twitter video, a record of the officers' past misconduct complaints. As Ava sat at the defense table, she felt a crackling energy in the air. Across the aisle, the prosecution team, led by Caroline Whitaker, sat with Carter and Lowe. Whitaker's expression was self-assured, as if she already had the judge's verdict in her pocket. Carter and Lowe sat arms folded, staring directly at Ava, as if daring her to meet their gaze. Ava didn't flinch. Her hands clasped together. She inhaled deeply. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person who had been silenced, intimidated, or discredited by officers like Carter and Lowe. The court clerk called the case. Judge Harrison stepped in, his black robe flowing. He cleared his throat. "Let's begin." The hearing opened with formalities. Then, Caroline Whitaker took the floor first. She methodically outlined the police narrative, painting Ava as an out-of-control individual who had no respect for law enforcement. Ava forced herself to remain still, even as the blatant lies piled up. Next, Stella stood up. With measured confidence, she introduced the cell phone video, playing it for the court. The short clip showed Ava standing calmly by her car, while Officer Lowe forcibly patted her down. There was no sign of aggression on Ava's part. In the background, snippets of the officer's sneering comments could be heard, albeit faintly. Judge Harrison leaned forward slightly, watching the screen. A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, passed across his face. But then, he hardened his expression again. When the video ended, Whitaker scoffed. "Your Honor, let's not forget, this is just a few seconds of footage. We don't know what happened before or after." Stella's jaw clenched, but she remained composed. "Miss Mitchell wishes to testify." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Ava stood. She walked to the witness stand, nerves dancing in her stomach. She glanced at the judge, his gaze unreadable. Under Stella's questioning, Ava recounted the traffic stop with calm precision. She clarified that she never resisted, never raised her voice, and only asked why she was being searched. Then came the cross-examination. Whitaker approached. "Miss Mitchell, you did question the officer's decision, correct?" "I asked why I was being searched." "That's not illegal," Ava responded evenly. "But you did speak back to them. You didn't remain silent." Ava resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "Asking a question is not resisting, counselor." Whitaker's voice hardened. "Isn't it possible the officers perceived your tone as threatening?" Ava took a measured breath. Then, she turned to the judge. "Your Honor, may I provide additional context?" Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." Ava looked him square in the eyes. "I am an assistant U.S. attorney with the Department of Justice, Northern District of Illinois." A ripple of shock spread through the courtroom. Carter and Lowe's expression stiffened. Judge Harrison's face froze for a moment. Whitaker's mouth parted slightly, then clamped shut. Ava continued, her voice steady. "I knew my rights that day, and they violated them. The entire case had just changed, and everyone in the courtroom knew it." A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom like a shockwave. Judge Harrison blinked rapidly, clearly thrown off. The officers shifted in their seats, their smug expressions gone. Whitaker tightened her jaw, scrambling to regain control of the narrative. "Your Honor," she stammered, trying to mask her surprise. "Miss Mitchell's position as a federal attorney does not exempt her from following the law. It's irrelevant to whether she resisted arrest." But Judge Harrison's demeanor had changed. He studied Ava carefully, as if reevaluating everything he had just heard. Ava met his gaze without flinching. "It's highly relevant, Your Honor," Stella interjected smoothly. "Because my client, who is an expert in constitutional law, knew she was being subjected to an unlawful stop and search. She did not resist. She asked a question, and these officers retaliated." She turned toward the prosecution table, where Carter and Lowe sat rigidly, their jaws clenched. They falsely accused a federal prosecutor of resisting arrest, and they lied in their police report to cover it up. The weight of her words hung in the air. Ava could feel the shift, the tension, the sudden uncertainty creeping into the prosecution's side of the room. Judge Harrison exhaled sharply. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice measured, "why did you not disclose your position with the DOJ at the time of the stop?" Ava kept her voice steady. "Because I knew that once they learned who I was, it would change how they treated me. I wanted to see how far they would take their abuse of power against someone they assumed had no resources to fight back." A beat of silence. The prosecutor, Whitaker, looked visibly unsettled. This wasn't just another routine, disorderly conduct case anymore. This had the potential to become a national scandal. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, flipping through the case file. For the first time that day, Ava saw uncertainty on his face. He turned to Whitaker. "Does the prosecution have any body cam footage to corroborate the officer's claims?" Whitaker hesitated. "No, Your Honor. The officer's body cameras were not activated during the stop." Stella seized the moment. "Your Honor, that alone is cause for concern. Chicago PD's own policies require body cams to be activated during all traffic stops. Yet, conveniently, these officers' cameras were off." Judge Harrison exhaled sharply. "This is highly irregular," he muttered. He turned back to Whitaker. "Given the conflicting evidence, the lack of body cam footage, and the serious implications of these allegations, I am dismissing all charges against Miss Mitchell immediately." Ava's breath caught in her throat. "Furthermore," Harrison continued, "I am ordering that the record of Miss Mitchell's arrest be expunged immediately. No criminal record shall remain of this incident." Ava exhaled shakily. Relief crashed over her like a wave. Around the room, low chatter erupted. Whitaker's shoulders sagged, and she turned to whisper furiously at Carter and Lowe. The officers looked stunned, their faces washed with the realization that they were no longer in control of the narrative. Harrison rapped his gavel for order. "This court is adjourned." He rose and exited quickly, leaving the courtroom buzzing with tension. Ava barely had time to process her victory before she was swarmed. Reporters had caught wind of her case, and the moment she stepped into the hallway, cameras flashed, microphones were shoved toward her face. "Miss Mitchell, do you believe these officers racially profiled you? How does it feel to have your charges dismissed? Will you be taking legal action against the Chicago PD?" Stella shielded Ava, guiding her through the throng of reporters. Outside, Marcus was waiting. A broad grin spread across his face. "This is huge," he said, clapping her on the shoulder. "They never thought this day would come." Ava nodded, but she felt a pang in her chest. "We exposed 2 bad cops today," she murmured. "But how many others like them are still out there?" Stella gave a firm nod. "We keep shining the light. That's how you root out corruption, one case at a time." A week after the hearing, Ava received an unexpected request. A private meeting with the officer's attorney. She arrived at a high-rise law office in downtown Chicago, where a stiff-looking attorney sat across from her. "My clients, Officers Carter and Lowe, are willing to accept disciplinary measures if you drop any pursuit of federal charges." Ava stared at him coldly. "So now they're sorry? Now that they're facing real consequences?" The attorney shifted uncomfortably. "They claim they never intended for this to escalate." Ava cut him off. "That's not how accountability works. Besides, I don't control the DOJ's decisions. If they committed misconduct, the Department of Justice will decide whether to pursue charges." Her refusal left the attorney crestfallen. He pleaded for some leniency, but Ava offered none. A week later, the departmental trial concluded. The verdict was swift. Both officers were fired from the Chicago PD. The internal panel recommended that the district attorney's office file criminal charges for perjury and falsification of official documents. The city erupted in debate. Some hailed the decision as justice. Others, mostly police unions, called it a witch hunt. Ava? She knew the truth. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. In the weeks following the verdict, Ava took a new role. Community groups invited her to speak at forums, where she shared her story not as a victim, but as a fighter for justice. She partnered with civil rights organizations, pushing for policy changes. More people began filing complaints, emboldened by her case. She had exposed 2 corrupt officers, but she knew that was just the beginning. Late one evening, as she sipped tea in her apartment, she scrolled through the news. Her story was still making headlines. Ava set her phone down. She felt exhausted. But she also felt hopeful. Because sometimes, justice didn't just happen. Sometimes, you had to fight for it. And Ava Mitchell? She was just getting started. A month had passed since the charges against Ava were dismissed. Life had settled into a new rhythm, but things were far from normal. Her name had become synonymous with police accountability, a rallying cry for justice reform. She returned to her usual duties at the Department of Justice, but the world outside her office had changed. People were watching. Ava's case sparked national outrage. Civil rights groups cited her story in discussions about racial profiling and police abuse. Community leaders invited her to speak at forums, where she shared her experience, not for sympathy, but to educate and inspire action. She made it clear. I am not anti-police. I am pro-justice. The applause and cheers fueled her resolve. She wasn't fighting for just herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had been silenced by the system. One morning, while reviewing a case in her office, her assistant knocked on the door. Ava, you have a meeting request from the attorneys representing Carter and Lowe. Ava set down her pen. They want to negotiate? She arrived at the law office later that afternoon, where a stiff-suited attorney greeted her with a forced smile. My clients are willing to accept disciplinary measures if you agree to drop any pursuit of federal charges, he said. Ava's expression didn't change. You mean now that they're facing real consequences, they want a way out? The attorney hesitated. They never intended for this to escalate. Ava leaned forward. They falsified reports. They tried to ruin my life. And how many others have they done this to without consequence? The attorney shifted uncomfortably. Miss Mitchell, surely we can come to a compromise, Al. No. Her voice was calm, but firm. Accountability is not a bargaining chip. She stood. If they committed misconduct, the DOJ will decide their fate. The meeting was over. 1 week later, the internal trial concluded. The verdict came down swiftly. Both officers were fired. The district attorney announced pending criminal charges for perjury and falsification of official documents. The DOJ opened an official investigation into patterns of misconduct in their precinct. The city erupted in debate. Police unions rallied in protest, claiming it was a witch hunt against officers. But communities rallied in support, demanding deeper reforms. Ava stayed silent in public, letting the legal system do its job. But privately, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Vindication. One evening, as Ava sat in her apartment, she scrolled through her phone. Headlines about her case still filled the news. She saw messages from people she had never met, thanking her, sharing their own experiences, asking for advice. She set her phone down, staring out the window at the city skyline. Chicago had always been her home. She had grown up watching injustice, feeling powerless against it. But now, she had proven that the system could be challenged. That one person, armed with the truth, could shake the foundations of power. And so, as she sipped her tea and prepared for another day at the DOJ, she made a silent vow. I won this battle, but the war for justice continues. And I will never stop fighting. Ava Mitchell's story became more than just a case. It became a symbol of resistance, a symbol of hope. And most importantly, a warning. To every corrupt officer, to every biased judge, to every system built to silence the powerless. They had been exposed. And thanks to Ava, the fight for justice would never be ignored again.